The Asia-Pacific region will reach $450 billion in travel bookings this year, more than a third of global travel. Whether you're a big OTA or a niche player, the lure of capturing even a tiny portion of that is powerful. But it's easier said than done. Assessing the competitive landscape, honing in on the real need for what you offer, learning how to adapt and operate. These challenges have stumped some of the world's most powerful tech companies. Here to discuss what's worked and what hasn't for international brands across Asia's diverse markets, please welcome our panelists. Mieke Schepper, Executive Vice President, Online Travel Companies and Managing Director, Asia Pacific for Amadeus. And Jeff Lewis, Vice President of Technology and Strategic Initiatives at TripAdvisor. And Jeff. So Jeff, you're a Canadian in Australia.
Yep.
For 2 decades now. How'd that happen?
Oh, a long time ago. I was just helping a friend out. Went to Australia for 4 months, and 24 years later, I'm still there. I think, who's been to Australia? I think you all know it's a paradise. And
yeah, maybe that's why I haven't been yet.
I've never had to shovel snow in Australia.
And so TripAdvisor, you've been with Trip for a while now, and TripAdvisor has mixed outcomes throughout Asia.
Yep.
What countries do you consider the biggest successes for TripAdvisor in Asia?
So, yes, Asia's a hard nut to crack. I think we all agree on that one. I guess the biggest success would obviously be kind of the very south part, which would be Australia and New Zealand, huge markets for TripAdvisor, very successful at monetizing them. Following that would be Japan. We've had a lot of success in Japan. We're the third most trafficked travel company in Japan, which is, I think, something to be proud of. And so very successful there and a lot of opportunity.
And what would you attribute the Japan success to? Local conditions or something TripAdvisor did?
Both, but I think the fact that when TripAdvisor entered Japan, they did it seriously. We have a local office, we have a big local team, we have local management who are Japanese, not Westerners, and they've been able to localize the product for that market to really suit their needs. It's been very successful.
All right, and Mieke, you're a Dutch travel executive, tech executive in Singapore for also close to 20 years, or?
Yeah, 14 plus.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I still remember the first day I arrived in Asia. It was actually the 26th of December, 2004. And for those who don't remember, that was the day of the tsunami. Oof. And I still remember there arriving, and we were supposed to go with a whole group of people. I was doing my MBA at that time to go to Koh Phi Phi. And if we would have basically planned that trip slightly different, we would have been on Koh Phi Phi at that time, which Koh Phi Phi was severely hit by the tsunami. I ended up actually going to Cambodia because it was the only place there was sun and a flight. And so we ended up going to Cambodia, and at that time in Cambodia, there was no ATM. In the whole country, 0 ATMs, 2004. Lonely Planet was the only way really to get around. I remember getting somewhere a flat tire with a bad car on the road from Phnom Penh to Siem Reap. Super nice and quiet at the temples. You could actually do sunrise without a lot of Koreans and Japanese and Chinese there with you. Fantastic experience, but completely different from when you're now. And so the experience of going there and seeing how much room there was, what made me stick to Asia Pacific for such a long time, because there's just so much room for growth and opportunities.
So you arrived and right away are thrown into this challenging situation.
Yeah.
And you were with, prior to Amadeus, you were at Expedia for 4 years. What were some of the biggest imperatives for the local team over that time?
So I joined Expedia in a time, 2015, when Expedia really wanted to scale in Asia Pacific. And after spending there a bit of time, I implemented a vision with the idea, and that we used as a slogan, the one who will rule Asia Pacific, or the one who will rule Asia will rule the world. And I truly believe that. Asia Pacific is where the growth is happening. And if you want to be successful globally, you have to be successful in Asia Pacific. There's just no choice.
No pressure, huh?
And so we did that, and that to get the attention of the global teams. Again, everybody wants to rule the world, so let's rule Asia Pacific. And we really worked together there with the teams, getting support from global teams. But what made the difference is really setting up local teams. Yeah. And in that time, I was there managing the team that signed up and managed hotels in Asia Pacific. We went local, hired local management, set up local offices, because at the end of the day, especially with hotels, it's all about local relationships. And as mentioned just before, it's the trust part. People need to trust you, need to trust that you have their best interest at heart to get started. And especially in markets like Japan and China, that is so important.
And you would have joined, I think it was when you joined, Elong was a part of Expedia, and it was divested shortly after.
Yes.
So what was the China situation like for Expedia in the aftermath of that decision?
So so before it was tough. I mean, Expedia was in China extremely early, and really learned a lot about China by being part with Elong and part of the growth. But as in many markets, it became a little bit of a burning money situation with just buying consumers. It was not a healthy situation, especially when you're listed in the US on the stock market. Having to explain that to investors every quarter isn't that great. And it was just not a sustainable situation. So by selling to Ctrip, and with that, the whole rationalization of the market has really helped the Chinese market to progress. It wasn't easy for Expedia to decide that, but it's kind of has made us, at that time, I still say us, because it hasn't been that long that I changed, relook at how to be successful in China. And so the approach in China very much is one of partnering with the strong local players, and very much also focusing on enabling Chinese travelers to go outside of China, because that's very much where Expedia Group has its strength, and also ability to offer something to Chinese customers, which some of the local Chinese players can't.
Got it. So our topic is lessons, insights, and truths from Asia, and you've both seen a lot of coming and going over many years. So I wanted to talk about some of the pitfalls that exist for Western companies entering Asia and how to avoid them. So some of these things probably more familiar with our audience than others, but I'm just going to pull up my first slide here. And so this first one, I think, is a really important one to get off the table first, which is treating Asia as a market.
Yeah.
It's more diverse than that. Yeah, and I think we didn't quite.
We didn't put Australia on there, but that's okay.
It's a bit of a strange fit anyway, yeah?
So, I mean, it's not a homogeneous market. Almost every single country requires its own strategy, requires its own local team and culture, obviously translation, language, customer service, expectations, everything. So kind of parking a little office in Singapore, for instance, because it's, they speak English there, and thinking that Asia's taken care of is probably not going to deliver what you want. And it's a hard slog. I mean, everything from marketing, partnerships, relationships, payment methods, communication, every single country has got its own challenges and requires product development, marketing strategies, operational strategies, etc. I'm sure you've got lots to add.
Yeah, no. And I see a difference how different companies approach Asia and how much understanding they have about how little understanding they have. And I would say for companies that have their headquarters in a huge country, like the US or China, it typically is really hard. Because if you have such a big home market, just accepting that there can be so many variants in those small places is a really hard thing conceptually. Yep. In that sense, I think European headquartered companies, they have a bit more appreciation of cultural differences. However, the flip side of that is that they do think that they understand it, and therefore also underestimate how little they actually really understand the vast complexity of Asia Pacific. So I would say it's a balance. For us based in Asia Pacific, going back to headquarters, it is the job to help to translate. And we always say, oh, but Asia is different. So we also don't make it easy. I would say the one part that really helps is really bringing some of the global executives and people into the market, not just for a day trip, just for a little bit of time to really start experiencing and start understanding the real differences between the different cultures.
Maybe take them, if the office is in Singapore, also take them to Korea or...
Yeah, so typically I would say I prefer not to do the meetings in Singapore.
Yeah.
Because then, honestly, in Singapore, people think, oh, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Yeah? And then that's the problem with Singapore. It all looks the same. The reality of Singapore is a little bit different if you go deeper into Singapore. But it's harder to see. And so it's a bit of a fake window. I've had experiences with other people. They organized the Asia Pacific experience retreat somewhere on a beautiful hotel in Sentosa, just off the coast of Singapore. And it's like the furthest away from what Asia really is. So I've done before, I've brought all the executives to Japan, staying at the Okura, which is a real Japanese hotel, having some Japanese experiences to really start building some level of understanding.
Are there any, do you think, any threads that do carry through most of Asia, or is that not even worth?
I would say there are groups. So you have Southeast Asia, well, very diverse. There are some similarities. And especially, for example, when you look at payment methods, the speed issues, mobile penetration, some of those things there are a little bit more like. So say Southeast Asia, you've got the Northeast Asia part. Japan and Korea are very different, but they're kind of different in similar ways. Then you've got China, I would say Greater China, not really actually Hong Kong and Taiwan, typically from a behavioral perspective, sit a bit closer to the Korean and Japanese markets. And then you've got your Pacific, which is completely different. So you can cluster it a little bit.
A little bit, but I think the only consistency is inconsistency. And the only consistency might be is the approach you have to take is a local approach, I think is critical.
All right, so our next pitfall is not empowering the local team. Is this something, I'm sure none of the companies that you have worked with have experienced this, but what, have you seen this experience?
It's very common, obviously. So the local teams are struggling to use the technology, maybe out of the US, the product out of the US, the marketing model or whatever it might be, and it just doesn't suit the local market. And they're not given the technology resources or the operational capability to make those changes to meet the local needs. And I think that's really where you have to empower your local team. And we were talking earlier and saying, the problem is you can empower them so much that every single country has their own technology, and then you lose all sorts of control, and you end up with a whole bunch of outdated platforms. So it's very difficult to build a platform that can scale, but still be personalized or customized for each market.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a trade-off, especially in tech, for having that local relevance, but a global scale, and finding that optimal balance. At Amadeus, we've recently switched from very local teams, and we're fully empowered, to more of a global approach, because we realized as well that providing solutions more for different types of customers was more important than having that local part. But it is a fine balance, because at the end of the day, customers operate in a certain market. And even in the online travel world, you've got plenty of OTAs that actually operate in 1 to 2 markets where the local market context is more important. And so, for example, in Australia, the one-way tickets is an extremely important part.
Right.
Now, this is something that in the global system doesn't exist, but it's a very specific Australia thing.
Yeah, because you go there for 4 months and you never leave.
Without it, you can't actually not operate. Yeah, and so these are some of those things that are sometimes really hard for the local teams to explain, because there's actually no rational explanation behind it. It's just the way it is.
Behavior.
Yeah.
So the next one we've got here is lacking the right local relationships. And this is something that I think everyone talks about in Asia, but I think that often they don't. It sounds like they don't really know what they're talking about. They just know they need a buddy.
Yeah. So relationships for both marketing, distribution, technology, support. There's so many different kinds of relationships you need in each country. Even something as simple as these, we all love the super app concept, and we're talking about it in Asia. I mean, just even picking the right one and how you're going to work with that super app, and whether it's going to be Grab or something else, and how you're going to integrate, how you're going to move your product through that. So yeah, it's kind of endless. I think we've all seen it.
Right, and there's very different brands you could work with.
Yeah.
There's that partner that might be your sort of Elong, that's your local equivalent, would be competitor. are there any places where you think this isn't as true, Mieke, as?
Yeah, I would say there's some places. So there's some markets where having a local partner, I would say, is really probably the best way to go. Where it's extremely hard as a foreign company to truly be successfully locally, like India and China.
Korea.
Korea is a mix, I would say. Korea and Japan, it's possible. Indonesia, again, depending on the business. And it's that local partner, it's for the relationships, but also to be able to operate truly locally. And it's not just to be able to hire local people and to also have the relevant cost structure to be relevant in that market. Because one of the issues I sometimes see with global companies is that they come with their same pricing model or profitability expectations that they have in Western Europe. The market is different, your competition set is different, the cost base is different. So sometimes these local partners help to operate more on a local level. And you can help them, again, then with that global technology platform. So it sometimes is a great mix.
Maggie, we have a question from the floor.
Oh, question.
This question is for Jeff. Actually, following this question about local partners, because TripAdvisor entered China a long time ago as Dao Dao, and later on it changed its brand to O, like the motto in the logo of TripAdvisor. But recently it's getting a bit quiet, facing the competition of Chungyou and Ma Fengwo. So are you giving up on China, having the headquarters in Singapore? Or if not, what is your cutting point into this market?
Sorry, that was almost impossible for me to hear.
I think it was TripAdvisor, has had mixed results in China. There's been ups and downs, and are you giving up on China? Lynn wants to know.
That's a really good question, and I'm probably not the person to answer that because I don't run the Chinese. We have a very large team in China, so I don't think we're giving up. I think that's probably not accurate. I think we are certainly pivoting and looking for opportunities as how we can succeed. Yeah, and there's probably a lot of different ways we can do that. And if anybody has any great ideas, love to hear. But yeah, we do have a big team in China, so it's not we're not exiting China.
It is a really interesting and unusual market for reviews and inspiration. And
yep.
So our next topic is government favoritism to local competitors. Certainly, everyone who exits markets in Asia, this is one of the first things that everyone points to and blames. Yeah,
I think, is it favoritism? I think it's just a lot of the local companies, they appreciate the needs as well from the local markets and invest back and don't see it as just I'm extracting from.
Yep.
I think the difference sometimes with some of the global companies coming in, they come with their global models, global tax structures, and they're not always thinking about how it is for the local community and how they give back. And so I think the governments in Asia Pacific are extremely sensitive as well, not just to have people coming to extract, like the old days, to extract value from the country, but also to reinvest. A lot of countries really want investments in tourism and developing that and are looking for partnerships to bring foreigners into the country, but also really to use that as a way to develop the market and the tourism market. So it's about that partnership also with the government, which typically some of the local companies just naturally do better because it's their community.
Yeah.
So in a sense, what you're talking about there is not so much, it's like you say, not so much favoritism, it's someone's not taking the time to come in and get to know all the stakeholders, and the government, which represents the citizens to a certain extent, is a stakeholder that you have to take time to get to know.
And it's understanding their worries and concerns.
Yep.
Yeah, and for example, in Japan, the regulations around vacation rental have been very often discussed. And I think more of a collaborative approach where the Japanese government has very strict, let's say, different profiles of different lodging types in the market. And so working with the Japanese government, not to go saying, hey, I don't care about what you have, but saying, hey, how can we make this fit? How does it fit within your system of different licenses? So we make this work because it's something good for the Japanese population as well.
Yeah, I think it comes down to respect. So I think what we find in China or Japan potentially is the local business have a lot more respect for the regulatory environment that they're operating within. And the favoritism might just simply be that they're following the rules and they appear to be favored, and others maybe aren't following the rules and are finding it a bit difficult to operate in those situations.
So we're almost out of time, and I don't have a slide that lists everything all of these factors together. But I wanted to get from you both what you think is the biggest one. So we had the most important one, treating Asia as one big market, not empowering the local team, lacking the right local relationships, government favoritism. We didn't get through nearly as many as I wanted to.
3 or 4 more, but.
And yeah, what among those 4, is there another that we didn't get to that you really think this is the key that people don't think about?
It's really deeper understanding the local consumer behavior and understanding their challenges, restrictions, why they would use their product in the right way. And again, you have to do that on a local level and not just by data, actually getting people to experience the product. And I think this is where some of the local players have overcome things like Traveloka in Indonesia around payments. I mean, it's not that people didn't like some of the global apps. You just couldn't use it because you had to fill in a credit card number. It's sometimes so simple. And so really spending time with consumers on a local level.
Yeah, I would say empowering the local team, because that brings a lot of that together. The local team they obviously understand their own market, they understand their own consumers, and by empowering them, you're allowing them to pivot the product, the business models, and meet that local need, find the right local partners. It just all comes out of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jeff and Mieke.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.